that, without further ado, we're going to dive right into our chat. So Jose, if you could introduce yourself and then read one or two of your poems from your incredible chapbook, The Fire Eater. If you have it, we're just dancing around here. It's incredible, and it's going to be guiding much of the conversation today. So yeah, just kind of tell everyone who you are and read a few poems for us, if you could.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for the invite. My name is Jose Hernandez Diaz, originally from Orange County, California, now residing in Los Angeles County. I write poetry and prose poetry primarily, and flash fiction as well. This is my chapbook, The Fire Eater, published by Texas Review Press, and NEA Fellow, and published in some journals. So I'm going to start off with The Fire Eater, which is the title piece to the collection. The Fire Eater. A fire eater performed his tricks on Hollywood Boulevard by the entrance to the 101 freeway. It was autumn. Just as he was about to inhale the bright flame, however, he slipped on a leaf and fell into the street. The motorcycle swerved out of the way and barely missed him. The fire eater quickly got up and jumped back onto the curb. He counted his lucky stars. 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars. But there was no reason to go on. At least he felt that way at the moment. His family of circus performers had abandoned him. He would have to make it on his own. Perhaps he could go back to school. Who was he kidding? Eating fire was his only skill. It wasn't much of a marketable skill either. Maybe he could make it on America's Got Talent, or get hired in a Vegas show. These were his hopes and dreams, but were they merely pipe dreams? For now, at least, he would have to be content with eating fire on Hollywood Boulevard by the 101 freeway. Maybe someone important would discover him there tomorrow. Maybe the flame would no longer scar his autumnal heart. So you want me to read a couple, or?
Oh, let's start there, and we'll see if we have a little time at the end. Maybe we'll ask for one more.
Okay.
So first of all, I just want to mention that I read your poem in Poet Lore, and then I noticed your book came out, so I got the book, and I think I tracked you down on Twitter to send a message just saying how much I'd love the book. And I should say that I don't usually do that, so that was true, pure joy based on reading this book.
I appreciate it.
I was so this was a book of joy for me. So I really, that's a rare experience, and thank you for giving me that experience. So
thank you.
That's my highest endorsement for this book.
Thank you. I love when that happens. It's such a treat.
So I'm going to start out with a few questions that we sent them to you earlier, so you have a heads up of what we're coming from. And I will mention as we get started, we will take questions in the chat window. So you have questions along the way, you can go ahead and type them in. We may take some as we go along. We'll try to take all of them at the end after Emily and I have each gone through a series of questions that we have together. So please ask questions that they come to you. We'll try to get to them all and keep up with them all. So one of the things I'm interested in this collection is the craft of surrealism. I think when I bring up surreal writing a lot of time, or fantastical writing, or whatever term you want to use for weird writing, quote unquote, the conversation usually turns to the content, because that's the thing that makes it weird, right? That's what makes something surreal, is what you're writing about. Skeletons as characters in some of your poems, for example. But I think there's a lot to be explored about how writing weird stuff influences things on a word choice level, on a grammatical level, and on a sentence level. So do you find anything special about the language of writing in this surrealist genre?
Well, in terms of the writing that influenced my writing, I can speak on, like Tate and Edson, Ray Gonzalez. They seem to have a straightforward approach, stripped down, spare style, everyday American speech, which sort of, when you counter it with something surreal, it sounds it's a bit humorous when it's an everyday situation, and then a skeleton comes in with a cigarette or something and sits right next to you at the bar, you know? So it's a little bit, you know, when they did the magical realist style with Marquez, he tried to do it in a way that was everyday. It was also like mundane and everyday scenarios that were that way. It was more it was less bizarre that way, in the sense of he wasn't trying so hard, I guess. That's it.
You mentioned humor, and I'll jump to that real quick. I mean, is humor something you aim for, or is that something that emerges just sort of naturally when you have these two? Is that an emergent thing from the two warring elements of simple writing, minimalist writing? I don't, simple not in the pejorative sense, but plain spoken, as you said, writing, and then weird content? Or is that something you really want to have happen?
Well, I'd like for it to happen, but I don't map it out like this poem is going to be A, B, C equals D, subtract the R. You know what I mean? Like I follow the line by line improvising, sort of in the surrealist mode where they would do the automatic writing, but not that hardcore, but it's a little bit of that. You know, I'm not going in there like trying to write this. The story that comes out is not what I tried to write. It was the first line that came to me. So that's usually, I take the line and I just improvise. But I do like to mix the comedy, the humorous with the darker. I think it comes from tape. People have told me I sound a little more like Edson to them, but that's where I learned it first, was from tape. Because at first I think I was primarily writing political poems, and then I saw that tape was celebrated and the poems were approachable and minimalist and absurd, and that could be taken seriously. So that this was revolutionary to me. And initially I didn't want to read him because, you know, he was a white author, honestly, and I was mostly reading like POC. And then I saw the cover of the book and it was like surreal and it looked like a Dolly painting. It just like spoke to me and I got into it.
So, I mean, you've mentioned a couple juxtapositions now. One which was the surrealism with the more everyday language style, and then the humor alongside the serious content.
Yeah.
How do those two elements work for you in your mind? Do you see them as something that's two elements that are battling each other, that are coming together, or they work sort of in harmony, they're running alongside each other, or some combination of both, or something I've missed entirely?
I think it's just part of life, you know, like living in different neighborhoods, different classes in terms of economic situations. You know, I deal with people, all kinds of different people on a daily basis. And some stuff is just absurdly funny, you know, that comes along, but it's sad also, you know, and it's like, I think those elements, like sometimes a Jackson Pollock painting just makes sense to me for some reason, you know what I mean? Like, or like a Picasso when he's like making everything crooked, you know, like sometimes those brokenness can, it can make sense, you know, and it can speak to you.
I like the concept of something making sense, because I think my entry point to weird writing, whether it was Amy Bender short stories or reading Calvino or Marquez or anything like that, was it didn't feel strange. It made sense in ways that sometimes the real serious, again in quotes, writing didn't make sense. I connected and understood things. Like my brain likes to go over here to think about the things that are right in front of it. So it likes to glance off to the side. So I understand that's illuminating to me. I appreciate the way you said that.
Yeah.
So related to humor, but a little different, I think, to me, is the concept of fun in writing and play as you write. And you hit on this a little bit with, like, you have a beginning and then you see where that takes you, which makes me think I might have an idea of where the answer to this would go. But what about the element of play that I see in your work? Sometimes I find the content melancholy or serious, as you mentioned, but there's an impishness, which was the word that came to mind when I was trying to describe it, about your style. Do you value fun? Is that something are you trying to have fun as you write poems? Do you want someone reading your poems to have a somewhat fun experience as they're going through?
Oh yeah, I mean, I want them to have fun. Yeah, definitely. I think, like I'm saying, I like to mix a lot of different elements. And if it was just fun, I don't know how that would work either, you know? Maybe I have a couple that are just fun. but I like to mix in different things, you know, like marigold. There's something beautiful. Um, the language to be smooth or like hypnotic, and then throw in something funny, you know. So just sort of like a collage style, I guess I would say.
It's, again, interesting. Now I'm like rethinking your work in my head right now. So, uh, but is for some people though, humor or fun is contrary to serious writing. Um, but I don't think I could write if I wasn't also having fun or cracking a joke once in a while at the same time. Do you encounter any resistance? Have you encountered any resistance? I don't know if it's in a
Yeah.
workshop or yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had people give me feedback that was unsolicited, saying things like you need to have more metaphors and more figurative language, and you know, which I get it. You know, they have to say something, I guess. You know, but I do have poems that are more in the narrative style about my real life. I would say that are more like traditional poems, lineation, and you know, couplets and all that stuff. Which you know, I publish them anyway, so. Um, as far as if they're saying it's not serious enough, you know, I'm getting them in the American Poetry Review and all the and Poet Lore and all these magazines. So I do like that aspect of getting like a funny poem next to like somebody's serious poem that took them like 7 years to write. You know what I mean? And this took me like 5 minutes, you know, and so I think that's something so like absurd, you know. So I do like that. I get a
God,
kick
I
out of
love.
that.
Oh, that's you've sort of set. You're setting new goals for me as a writer, like to get my weird, quick, weird idea I had and just write it down real quick next to the most serious thing that someone has invested their all in.
I think
But
Dean Young said something like, just because it took you like 7 years to write doesn't necessarily mean it's better than what I wrote this morning. You know what I mean? So
that's great. So is part of the attraction of surrealism this fun factor, this idea that you have an idea, I'm going to run with it for, I'm going to write this morning, and it's going to be what I want it to be by the time lunch rolls around.
well, it's fun too, but it's also like dark, you know, it's not just like, it's almost like bipolar, you know what I mean? Like, I think surrealism is also like an art, and like you're saying, you don't want to say you're a surrealist necessarily. So it's kind of like a tricky thing. I don't limit myself to just writing the bizarre or the surreal or the absurd. Like I write about my family all the time. That's one of my main muses. Or so yeah, I don't limit myself. I
Yeah.
sort of just approach whatever that day, that morning, whatever comes to me. You know, I write about it.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to mean that there is no serious content in the book. It is full of it. I think it's just that it's striking how willing you are to play with this form and willing to jump where your mind takes you. And that's really was really refreshing to me to see those things next to each other with given equal weight and equal care.
I think also in my personal life, I was just going through things where it was like um, I was struggling. I was, you know, I had problems, and then I was winning like an NEA, you know. So it was like most people who are winning those things are like professors and stuff like that, and I was like just trying to get by, you know what I mean? So that was kind of like my poetry was like it was surprising, it was absurd, and there was I think I could relate to a lot of the content that I was writing, you know, which I think most people can with their own writing.
I'm going to hand off to Emily for a few questions now. And as she's unmuting herself, I'm going to mention too that please ask some questions in the chat window. We will try to get to all the questions that get asked, so please ask them away. And Emily, to you.
Yeah, this has started, it's given me so many more things that I want to talk about now, but I just love the idea of, again, you know, that playfulness with the language. I remember, Jose, reading your submission to Poet Lore, and we have a team of readers who also reads, and we were all just kind of like, this is not something that we've seen before. And that's exciting when you're putting together a journal, because you're trying to kind of mix things up and really get a wide range of maybe the more serious and then the humorous. And the one that's in Poet Lore is the skeleton in the book, which I think just builds such a world in those 2 verse paragraphs. And it's just incredible. So I did want to kind of jump in, and, you know, we've mentioned you're publishing and publishing in so many journals. And I feel like every time I see a journal come out, you're in it. And I'm like, how is he writing all these poems? How is he kind of like doing all this production of poems? So I just wanted to dive in and hear kind of your approach to submitting and getting your work out there. How do you determine which journals you want to submit? Maybe your more fun poems too. Does it matter to you where you submit them? Yeah, I'm just really curious how you go about that.
In terms of submissions, I just go through like a couple months where I'll just write every day in the morning. I sort of have insomnia, so I'm talking like 4 to 6 in the morning or something like that.
Wow.
Where I'll just I can't sleep and perfectly awake, and I'll just start writing and sort of figuring out formulas through the years, how to write. And, in terms of submitting to journals, if I like the journal, I'm going to send you some poems, so I submit to most journals, so there's rejections too, a lot of that. And I think one of the biggest things people have, they don't have thick skin, so they don't want to submit a lot, or the financial thing as well. So I don't really have much of a social life, I don't go out much. I don't, like, sometimes I feel like people are like mad at me sometimes because I'm publishing so much, but I'm like, if you stayed home for the past 6 months like I didn't go out to the bar every and submitted on a Saturday night, you know what I mean? Like, it's not fun, so I'm sort of sacrificing stuff too,
Yeah. And it speaks to the amount of work that it is. And I think, we love to think of poetry as, something that's always inspired and almost like we're getting like inspiration from a muse or something, but there is work into it, and there is so much time put into submissions and money and work and revisions, and then of course the rejections and the emotional work too.
Yeah, when I first started writing, I tended to wait for the inspiration or the line. And then my professor at Antioch, Richard Garcia, told me to just go every morning to work at it. You have to find, the muse will find you while you're working at it, or something like that. And so I would just, every time that I tried to write a poem, I was able to, and it would get published. So I was like, I'm just going to try to write 2 or 3 in the morning, And for months I would do that. And I just have so much stocked up right now that I could submit to a lot of journals. Yeah.
That's great. I see a request in the chat to have another poem. Would you mind sharing another one with us?
Definitely. This next one is called The Man and the Antlers, and it was published in Bennington Review. A man picked wild berries in the forest, ate them, and suddenly grew antlers. He was shocked. He ran around in circles. Why? Why? Then he saw a small creek. He looked into the water. He saw his antlers in the reflection, strong and sharp. Why me, he said. Why me? Then a bear approached him. He was startled for a moment, but then charged at the bear with force.
I love that one. And I love too, this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, how in each of these poems, there's kind of links that transfer to the next poem. And that's not something you always get in other poetry collections. Not everything connects in that way. And I really loved being able to trace those threads through the book. And then, the first time you see the man in the Pink Floyd shirt, and then he has his sequence of poems, and then now a skeleton's in, and then the skeleton has that sequence. So could you talk a little bit about how you conceptualize the chapbook and kind of put it together in that way?
Yeah, so it's like the second half of my full length. So my full length is primarily identity-based poetry or about my personal life and family, odes to family. So this is the second half, and there's more than that too. It just got to the point where that was the hardest part for me. I had all the poems written, but it's kind of all over the place, Mm. So then I just sort of realized, okay, I'm writing Man in the Pink Floyd shirt. That's clearly a series, and the skeleton is a series that'll go in the back because, you know, death and everything. And then I was writing prose poems that were first person and third person, so I sort of organized it in that sense. And yeah, and then there would be links, like you're saying, a fire or different themes that would unite it when I was organizing it. But it took a while.
Yeah.
But by the time yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
By the time my editor asked for it, I had just like finished it, and he said a full length or the chapbook if I had to send. And the full length was not looking at that, so I just sent the chapbook, and he accepted it.
That's awesome. I love hearing that story, because I think chapbooks are having more of a moment now too, and it's interesting to hear how it is already kind of built into your full length collection. I think sometimes chapbooks, you know, I think when I put together my chapbook, I was like, I don't really have enough for a full length, so I'm just gonna kind of toss these together and see where it lands. But I love the idea that this is already kind of existing in a larger project for you.
Mine was like, I could make this chapbook, it had its own identity, you know, and the front of the manuscript had its own identity in terms of like Latinx poetry. So I just kind of wanted to publish it as a chapbook to see how it would look on its own. And I did submit the first half of it also as its own chapbook a couple of times, but didn't have as much luck. But overall together, as I think it works well now, and I just started sending it out again. So
yeah, that's so exciting. Another thing that I was really interested in is, let me scroll through my questions here. Kind of how, you know, you spoke a little bit about starting with an idea and just kind of seeing where it went. And then you also talked about working in modes that aren't necessarily prose poetry. So I'm curious about, do all the poems that you start as prose poems stay prose poems, or is that kind of like a mode where you feel like you can shift back and forth and see what the poem wants to be?
Yeah, well, they do tend to stay prose poems, the ones that are surreal, and I do have ones that are based in my real life that are prose poems as well, but it tends to be playing with persona and personality and bravado and things like that. But my poems that are lineated, they tend to be just about odes to family and growing up and first generation, low income, things like that. So I kind of know when I'm going in there that I'm writing a poem, traditional poem, a little more less playful, definitely less playful, more like after I write it, I feel better about my past, about my life, you know. And I publish poems about my parents in the Georgia Review and Poetry Magazine. So like to me that means everything, because you know, they're great journals, and one of them was just, my mom was just telling me a story in the kitchen when she was cooking, and I was just literally just writing everything she said. So basically you're getting published in Georgia Review. I'm just writing it down, you know. So
That's awesome. And I love how on social media you're so open with your family, show, like holding up your books or your journals where you've been published, and I think that is so great to see.
I think growing up I was mostly about my friends, and I was partying a lot, football and all that stuff, and all that kind of went away, you know. Like everybody lives their own life, they have kids, you see them once every few years maybe, but family's always gonna have your back. So
yeah. So I'm gonna jump in the chat real quick because we have a question from Michael. Do you feel too many contemporary poets are way too determined to get published by sounding like successful poets? And then do you as a poet encounter a lot of unique poetic voices that maybe don't have the qualities that would stick out to a publishing company but still have merit for their originality? So it's kind of a two-part question there.
Yeah, no, I think definitely that the poetry getting published today is, you know, winning awards today. It does have similar aesthetics, similar trauma base maybe or something like that. But you know, I also dabble in that poetry myself. Like the first half of the book is kind of like that. If for my full length, you know, it's not too different. So I kind of have that sort of the realist side, and then the second half is the surrealist side. You know, so it's kind of split. Um, but yeah, I think there are a lot of great experimental poets. Like Moroso de Giorgio when she was alive. I don't know how famous she was in her lifetime, but I don't think she was too famous. But her work is extraordinary, and um, there's a lot of poets that I think if you do try to get experimental with it, it can be risky.
Mm.
You can get isolated and pigeonholed, you know. So that's why mine, you know, I think it's both my full length, you know. So um, at first, I think it was a burden to have two different voices in the work, but now I'm just sort of going with it, and it was just the finals for the National Poetry Series, so that
Yeah,
was a
I
good
saw.
sign.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
incredible. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that Michael's question kind of gets to one of my questions, which was about your work on kind of the back end of a few journals, and then you do
Right.
some consulting editing work as well. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit on how that has influenced your own process, or if it has or has not.
I think it helps you write poems more efficiently, faster, in terms of like most of the editing is like getting out unnecessary words, you know, and elongating the line, you know. So um, I think it just makes you pay attention more to form and words. You know, you can say pretty much a lot of things in poetry. You know, I'm not going to be like, don't say this, you know, or be more flowery or be less flowery. I guess you can say that, but I tend to work on just getting the unnecessary out, or adding punctuation to, you know, pace and things like that. So I think it helps you be a more efficient writer.
Yeah, it's interesting earlier when you were saying that some of the unsolicited feedback on your work, which I mean,
Yeah,
we don't always want that, right? But some of it was saying
yeah,
things kind of prescriptive, like more similes or more metaphor.
yeah,
And I'm also one to kind of shy away from those things too, which is what I appreciate so much in this work. I mean, I think to the first poem in the book where it just says he counts his lucky stars, and then 1 star, 2 star, like that moment to me was like brilliant, because it's like
yeah.
you're literally, you know, it takes something that is a figurative saying, but it's making it literal in the poem. So um
And
yeah.
also, like, I like to mess around sometimes with like childish type things, you know, like 1 star, 2 star, like that's silly, you know. So sort of like, why would somebody writing poetry in a magazine, you know, be speaking that way, you know, like. So I think I learned that from Tate and Edson, you know. But somebody was just asking me today, like, telling me who I was influenced the most by. And I think it's just, you get influenced initially, you know, 5 years ago when I started reading them. But after a while, you're more just inspired by them, and you don't read them every day, you know, but they're like kind of like lingering ghosts. And I think I can relate to Tate a lot in terms of like his father and things like that. So,
Yeah, that's a great jumping off point to get to Francisco's question in the chat. Um, the question says, I was delighted to hear you mention Richard Garcia, who I think is one of the most underappreciated American poets. I may be making an assumption here, but I see a certain kinship between his work and the work in The Fire Eater. Could you speak a bit about any other Latinx poets, living or not, whose work has been important to you, in addition to Ray Gonzalez?
yeah, everybody assumes Richard Garcia taught me how to write prose poetry because he was teaching at Antioch. But I actually took a semester off, 2 semesters off. I was just like, that was kind of my thing in undergrad and graduate school, was taking semesters off and going to the library. And that's when I discovered James Tate. And that's when I started writing these prose poems. And we, you know, we email each other every now and then, me and Richard. And one time he even said, where did you pick this up? You didn't get it from me, you know? because I was already writing that when I went up to him, but I could see the similarities definitely. And I started reading him later, and he definitely is like, I could see the similarities. You know, he's one of my favorite prose poets. And I told him he needs to write more prose poets because now he's trying to be more political. But anyways, so I was reading mostly Tate. Honestly, initially that's what it was, and I don't think our poems look alike. I think it's a lot longer. It was just more the philosophy and sort of being the immature kid that read the dictionary or something, you know, or read poetry, you know. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Do you have any? Oh, go ahead.
And I was gonna answer the second part of the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's who I was saying, Moroso de Giorgio. She's one of my favorites. She's from Uruguay. That was probably like 40 years ago or something. But she writes prose poems as well, and they're surreal and spooky. I kind of found her when I already established my voice, but I see similarities in there for sure. She's a little more like sophisticated language in terms of her mechanics, you know, that she's working with. I'm trying to be more stripped down. But let's see, Ray Gonzalez. Who else? Octavio Paz, I think, you know, a lot of his writing is surreal. But I'm all about, you know, Latinx and representing and everything like that too. But, you know, I've submitted to Canto Mundo and all those things, and they always reject me. And I know everybody gets rejected, but I mean, I have like 1,000 publications. I'm getting rejected. So I think it's more based on the work not being like fitting what a Chicano is supposed to write about. So that kind of upsets me sometimes, you know. But I have those poems too, you know. So I don't know. It's complicated.
Yeah. It's so hard when you know that there's so many submissions to so many things, and it's always even with literary magazines, it's always whose eyes are on it first, and is it getting bumped up to the next level, and that level of chance there. Okay, we have another question. Can you talk about finding your voice? How did you know you'd found what sounds like you, or how you'd like to express yourself? That's a great question.
Yeah, like I think Tate's voice is a little more like Midwestern, you know, in terms of his like vernacular when we got the dialogue going in the surrealism with the people speaking, you know, it sounds kind of weird if my people were kind of like exactly like that, you know. But at the same time, where I originally grew up was Orange County, California, and that's kind of like all Americanville, you know. But we grew up poor there, but in apartments. But the people we grew up with are multicultural, you know, and everybody sort of got along in a cordial way, and so they're kind of similar. They're kind of similar, I think, to Midwestern aesthetics in Tate's work. So that's where that I think that's where that connection sort of happened. But I think when it sounds sort of like this folksy, corny type of way, and you juxtapose it with something surreal, it's illuminating, and I think it just makes the everyday like interesting, you know, and holy, I think.
Yeah, I like that you brought up dialogue, because that's another thing I really noticed in the chapbook is there's a lot of kind of embedded dialogue in the poems, and it's not something you see very, very much in poetry. It's this kind of dialogue. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you craft that within the poems too.
Yeah, I mean, if I wasn't such a chicken, I would get a James Tate tattoo, because I definitely learned that from him. Just reading his poems, I would see the dialogue, and that's weird, you know, why are you doing that? But okay, it makes sense, and he just had this way of writing that was hypnotic, and like he would blend it all, and I just read so much, and then eventually I just started writing myself, you know, and trying to make it my own, and now, you know, I haven't read Tate in a long time because frankly his poems are not really Instagram for photos, you know what I mean? They're so long that I don't even post them anymore. But also I think he just taught me already, you know what I mean? It's like he moved on. I never met him in my life, you know, and I do worry that some people might think I try to imitate or something like that, but I don't think it would work if it was purely, trying to be like him. I think it's more just inspired by.
Yeah, that's so key, like how we as poets, we take in another poet's work and it serves us for so long, and then you kind of can put it away knowing that you've kind of absorbed the qualities from it that you need to inspire your own work.
I think so, because now when my new work is going in different directions and maybe more image based, less dialogue, and getting a little less bizarre. My life is a little more becoming more balanced. I'm not getting in trouble or anything like that. So it's like I'm not writing so bizarre anymore, I don't think.
We have another question in the chat. Do you have any hard and fast rules to what a poem or your poem must be?
No, but I won't submit anything that I don't believe in. Like if it's publishable, then I'm gonna keep submitting it until it gets published. But I just know, it's like a sixth sense when you write something and you feel it's done and you think it stands on its own feet, and it's a complete piece of art, and if it's not complete, that's what's complete about it, is its brokenness or something,
Yeah, I'm curious now about what your editing process looks like, because I'm very much like a tinkerer as I write. So it'll take like so long to get the poem out on the page because I'm like doing all this too much self-editing. And you mentioned kind of, writing every day, and sometimes the poem, it just comes out. So I just wonder what that process looks like to prepare a submission.
I would say that 90% of what I write comes out, like basically what gets published in like 5-10 minutes. And that's poetry and prose poetry. But, in 2016 or 2015, I forget, I took time off school, and I was just reading a lot. I read like 90 books or something like that. So you learn like lineation, like subconsciously, I think, you know what I mean? And so yeah, there's not much editing at all. I mean, a few words here and there to make it quicker or something like that. But most of what's written in the initial writing, maybe like 3 to 5 words here and there, or a comma or something like that on like half of the work or something. But yeah,
I love doing these craft chats because we always learn more about what a actual living writer, like the habits are. And I think, a lot of times we're told, edit, you have to go through 5 drafts before it's ready for a submission. There's kind of these like imposed editing rules or maybe a framework. And it's really comforting to hear that for you, at least, it can kind of just, when it's ready, it's ready. And if that's right when you wrote it, then there it goes off to be submitted. And yeah.
Reminded me a little bit of the author Jesse Ball, who talks about the fact that he plans everything in his head. He thinks really hard, and then he tries to write an entire novel in 2 weeks and doesn't do much revision. He pre-revises. He thinks about it, he tries, doesn't necessarily, he's very free-flowing, but he's got all the kinks worked out, most of the kinks worked out before he ever goes to the page. So I could never do that, but it's really interesting to see that that's an option that an author with a particular skill set could use, like you, Jose.
I think Zach was also saying that there was impish quality to it, and I've heard monkish in reviews and things like that. So I was also living that lifestyle for a while, and not getting out much, bipolar, and just reading the literature, and I was talking to my therapist, and I was like, I never had a Mexican teacher or a teacher of color in my life, in elementary school through high school. So, and then I said, why don't I write a poem about that? And I just started with the title and I wrote it all in like 5 minutes. So it's like, what is there to do? You know, I lived that my whole life. I can write that down with pressure like that. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
My life has been a little unorthodox. I've lived in different cultures and communities at the same time. So I think that in a way it led to a lot of material, you know?
Yeah.
I had one more question that popped in my head while you were going there.
Right.
So how does your realistic poems, how are they influenced by your surreal poems and vice versa? And similarly, how are your lineated poems influenced by your prose poems and vice versa? Is there a benefit to you to writing across these two styles and these two types of poetry?
Well, I don't think they necessarily have to be related. The everyday poems are magical in the sense that my father and his sacrifice for our family, that's, you know, for example, I wrote one the other day that said, my father never ate until everyone had eaten. So we would always ask him to come eat at the table, and he would just say, I'm you know, in Spanish, that no tengo hambre, you know, and ya comí, but in reality, when everybody finished eating, he would come and eat to make sure that everybody ate, you know? So that's just a poem right there. I don't even have to write these things, you know? I mean, these people are poems, and they don't even know it, you know? So in the surreal, it's magical, you know, because when the guy jumps from the burning building and he gets caught by the preacher, they turn into pigeons. But in the everyday situation, it's just about good old fashioned like hard work that my family has done and sacrificed for, you know, coming to this country, and you know, my sister going to Harvard, me going to Berkeley. It's not because of us. Also, it's not just because of us, but because of our parents' sacrifice.
Yeah, there's a way that you're finding the magic in the
Yeah.
real and the surreal, and that's what poetry can do. And yeah, these people are poems. Such a great quote. And
I think that's what ties the collection together, you know?
Yeah. We have another question in the chat from Marge. I think I'm pronouncing that right. When I read Tate or Edson, sometimes I feel like I'm being left out of an inside joke, which takes away from the pleasure of the poems for me. That's not my experience with your poems in The Fire Eater. How would you coach a reader to read surreal prose poems in general? What pleasures should we read for or aim to perceive?
Yeah, no, I mean, I read Edson myself, sometimes I'm like, okay, he's just messing around now, you know what I mean? Like, but that's his style, you know? What I think separates us is that I don't want to say like mine is more beautiful. That sounds absurd, you know, but I think I try to have more elements that are like, I guess, poetic, or just you know, marigolds, like I'm saying, skeletons, and well, he has skeletons too, though. I know what she's saying, but I think Tate has a little more. It's more approachable, I think, or there's more beauty involved. But I think I try to make it a little more relatable, I guess, subconsciously, I think.
Yeah, there's a way.
I don't think they care. because they found it later in life, the prose poetry. He already had won the Pulitzer. He already won the National Book Award. He doesn't have to prove anything to anybody, you know, Tate. So that's when he just started writing nothing but prose, you know. Me, on the other hand, this is when I'm first writing, you know.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. But
I think that I can't afford to not completely care what people think, you know. Yeah.
Right,
also,
the
privilege. Won't get
privilege.
published. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel, even with the surrealist kind of happenings in the book, like I could be sitting next to the skeleton lighting a cigarette. You know, there is a very welcoming quality to the world of The Fire Eater, the collection as a whole, and I think that is important to note for sure. Oh yeah. Okay, and I did want to ask, You also do work writing reviews,
Yeah.
and I wanted to see how that influences your work, or how you see that as part of your kind of poetic practice.
I don't know exactly how it influenced it, probably on the subconscious level mostly. But I think it makes you more efficient, like editing does. But when I go in there, it has to be something that speaks to me. You know, I've countered other books that they spoke to me, but maybe their craft and their aesthetics were just different, so different that I couldn't penetrate it. You know, so it's not that it's bad. It's just that it was different in the sense that I couldn't get inspired writing about it. So I've had those situations, and it's perfectly fine literature, you know. So just maybe different schools of poetry. But so in terms of my reviews, I just something that speaks to me, and I can just elaborate on that.
Yeah, we always in these craft chats, we always encourage everyone to write reviews of the books if they liked it, and I'm curious to see what you think the role of a review is in kind of the larger literary sphere.
What's going on, you know, under the hood and everything, and maybe the lineages, and yeah, just what's going on, your take on it. I always say just take it one poem at a time, you know, and see what builds up in the review. I don't think I'm like the, you know, I'm just doing it because I love it, you know, and so just you have to be passionate about it. I'm not really the type to write something about something that I don't like, just because I tend to like it all, even if it's like boring to me or something. Like, who am I to say something? You know what I mean? Like, it's like religions. I'm not going to be like, oh, your religion's it's garbage. You know, like I don't care what you believe in. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, there's a way that reviewing also kind of helps clue, at least for me, it helps clue me into some of my own impulses as a writer or as a reader even. So it's kind of like getting in that different mind space and then going from
You were
there.
talking about drafts, and with poems, with reviews, that's a whole nother story. I'm like a lot of drafts, you know what I mean? And it doesn't come as easy to me, like writing essays, and so that's why I avoided it for so long, you know, and I just started last November. So it's something that I was afraid of, and I thought it was too challenging, and I always avoided. And when I started getting them published, it like felt good, you know, because I had to work at that, you know. It wasn't just, you know, it wasn't as natural, I guess you could say.
Yeah, kind of working a different writing muscle almost in that practice. Yeah. I want to say, if anyone has some more questions, please throw them in. We have about 5 minutes left. But
why don't we, people formulate questions, can we ask for one more poem to be read as we're getting near the end? I would really love to hear. I've enjoyed hearing them out loud.
Maybe I'll read the one from Poet Lore.
That would be awesome.
Yay!
Okay. The Skeleton in the Book. A skeleton sat by a lake and read a book. The book was about the origins of the land of skeletons. The land of skeletons was founded 600 years ago. The skeletons rose from the grave and demanded their freedom. Long had they waited in the cold earth. The skeletons fought many dragons in order to gain their freedom. Many rode valiant horses to fight their enemy. When the war was over, the skeletons raised their revered flag, a skeleton and a sword. They began to build a civilization of skeletons. They elected officials. They danced in nightclubs. They surfed in the ocean. War never returned to the land of skeletons. They lived in peace with the crows, mountain goats, and the redwoods alike. The land of the skeletons is our home.
Thank you. Yeah, we love that one.
Thank you.
We do like a staff book club whenever the Poet Lore comes out, and Zach was like, I'm going first and I'm going to talk about this poem. So
Awesome.
it's definitely one that we keep going back to. Oh, we have a question in the chat from Amanda. Are you working on any new projects?
Oh man, yeah, actually. So I got the full length that's like ready to go. Like I'm just like waiting for this thing to happen. Like, yeah, I'm just so excited about. And then I have another full length that's pretty much done. I just have to organize it. But in terms of like 60, 70 poems, yeah, I have that. And, you know, quality poems. And we have the Man in the Pink Floyd shirt in the first book. In the second book, it's the Man in the Chicano Batman shirt. And the Man in the Rage Against the Machine shirt. So, yeah, I have different, you know, and the Man in the Mars Volta shirt. So yeah, that's what I have, and I'm anxious to put it. I don't want to start organizing yet until this one gets picked up, so I don't just like steal from the second one and just like take the best poems out and put them in the first. You know, I want to just sort of keep them separate.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. I'm curious, when you're laying out your work or organizing it, do you print it out? I always like print mine and kind of lay it on the floor really obnoxiously, but I always wonder how other poets can do that.
I've done that too, yeah. Or I'll just like, mine are kind of, some of them are easier to separate because, you know, Chicano Batman is like, or like Pink Floyd, you can just separate them based on that, you know. So they're a little easier to separate now.
Yeah, they have their own kind of grouping together.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. I know I, for one, can't wait to see those projects come out in the world, but I'm sure that we'll see poems from each of them keep making their way out. That'll be awesome.
Two sales at least for all your books. 2 sales at least for all your books from Emily and I.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm just excited to like give people a little taste here and there with like the publication and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and now's the time to submit. Almost every magazine I know is open right now. So time to send them out. Yeah.
I probably have like 50 submissions open right now or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're reaching the end of the time here. So I think we're going to wrap up the chat and say thank you, Jose, for joining us. Emily, thank you for sharing this with me and asking smart poetry questions where I could only ask a few sort of interesting questions, not quite poetry questions, as I am not a poet. But we're going to stick around for a few minutes afterwards. So if you want to hang out for a minute and unmute and say hello, you're welcome to do so on this Friday night for a little socialization. And most importantly,
buy the book.
Buy the book.
Link is so in the chat.
Yeah, love it. Love it to death.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.